Okay, hello and welcome to Component Rescue Board Repair. Today, I'm not actually going to be fixing a board. I'm going to be showing you guys a tutorial on how to reball an SMC. The board I'm doing this on actually is for a 2010 MacBook that I had lying around, so I thought I would just go ahead and refurbish it. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And the specific issue I'm having with this board, I'm not actually going to show the full process of me fixing it. However, it is missing PM Sleep S5L, and on these specific boards, there's two things that could be causing it: either um, either a dead SMC or a dead I forgot what they're called on these older boards, but it's basically the equivalent of the PCH. I'm trying to remember what they're called on here, but I mean that's not important. So we're going to go ahead and switch over. So this is going to be my donor board right there. Here's the SMC. I'll go ahead and add a tiny bit of flux just to make this a little easier. I don't need a ton since we're not flowing it into place. I just want a tiny bit to make it a little easier to take off, because I also don't want to make a huge mess with this. Okay. And we'll get our hot air turned on. And dang, that's looking pretty good. Oh, I also forgot, I gotta turn on fume extractor, because we don't want to set the fire alarm off in here. Okay. And now we'll go ahead and start applying a little bit of heat to the board to get that flux liquefied and underneath the SMC. And once we get that going, I'll go ahead and go in close and get the SMC nice and basically I do this. When you're doing this, you want to do about the same thing you do for a reflow, except I usually don't use quite as much flux. Come on. There we go. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, and now, as you can see, we got the SMC off of the board. And right now I'm just letting the flux fumes get pulled up by the fume extractor. So now I can go ahead and set this board off to the side because we don't need it anymore. So next thing you need when you're doing this is one of these things. This is going to hold the SMC as I'm in place while I'm getting it ready to reball. So go ahead and grab it and throw it in here. Okay, there we go. Okay. So next thing we gotta do is I'll add some flux to it. And then once I do that, I'm going to pass over the whole thing with my soldering iron to put some leaded solder on it. And oh no, that's not good. Looks like we're missing a pad on this SMC. Did it get ripped off on the board? Well, it looks like it did. That's really strange. Yeah. And I mean, that's something you just got to be careful about when you're doing really any rework, is to not rip the pads off the stuff. But since this is really old and I'm pulling this off a liquid damaged board, I'm not even sure this SMC is good. But just for the purposes of showing you all how to do this, I will go ahead and finish reballing this just so that you guys can see. Okay, so next I'll grab my iron. Let's kind of go over all of these to put some fresh solder on there. And you know, some people online, that's really all they do, is just go in like that and apply an even-ish amount of solder to all the balls. But we're going to go ahead and do a proper reball. So usually the easiest way to do this when reballing is going to be to use hot air to wick all of the solder off the pads. So that's what we're going to try and do. Sometimes that doesn't work out too well, and you may just have to carefully do it with an iron. But we are going to go ahead and try and do this with hot air, just because usually that is the better way to do it, because there's less likely chance of you damaging the chip. But ours is already damaged, so however, if I wanted to, I could run me a little wire on there, and I might end up doing that on the board that I'm going to do this on. Even though it is an old piece of crap and probably isn't worth all of this time and effort, especially since you can get these boards working for about $25 to $35. So like I said, for the most part, this is all just a demonstration on to show you guys how to do it. So I'll grab the hot air. This will wick away. And I missed a little bit of that. And now that should all be good. All of those are nice and wicked off. So, of course, what I'll do next is I will grab my stencil, as you can see right here. And I think that's the wrong direction. That is the wrong direction. I will grab the stencil and I will set it on there. And I forgot on this one, I actually have to take it out of this. So I'll go ahead and get that removed. We're just going to do this straight on the wood. So then you grab this and you just set it on top and get it lined up just right. Like that. Then you'll grab some Kapton tape like what I got here. This is being a little pesky. They'll cut. Usually you'll want to do 4 pieces. Sometimes if you're sticking this to something that's a little more sticky, you might be able to get away with 2. But I usually use 4. And you'll grab the Kapton tape. And you'll tape it down, like so. And of course that Kapton tape will hold that down while you're heating it up. And if you don't know what Kapton tape is, it is a special kind of tape that has a very high heat resistance, and it's also not electrically conductive. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our thermal paste, or not thermal paste, solder paste. Mine's in a little bucket and I have a special pair of tweezers I use to apply it, just because that kind of seems to be the easiest way. So I'll just grab some like that. And I'll just put it on there like so. And I'll try and spread it around. And you want to try to fill up all of the holes on here, because this paste is what is going to make all of the solder balls. And if you don't fill up a hole, then you'll end up with a ball that's too small and it won't actually make contact when you try to solder it onto the board. So you absolutely have to make sure that you really fill up all of the holes. I could use a little more solder paste. Throughout that long hole right there. There we go. That should all be good now. And then I keep a whole bunch of just used up gift cards like these. And I use those sometimes to smooth it out. Another good thing to use to smooth it out is just like a paper towel. So you just get a little paper towel and you just kind of go like that. And you want to wipe all of the extra solder paste away. Because if you leave any on there, it's not going to be good. Because it will, if you have any extra, then you're going to end up with a ball that's too big, and then you'll once again run into the issue of it not soldering onto your board properly. There we go, that looks pretty good to me. See if I can scrape away some of this. Okay. Now that that's all good, we will get our hot air. And this part you have to be really careful. You can't heat it up too quickly, or with too fast of air, or the balls won't stick properly to it. So at first you want to kind of heat it up from a distance. Just kind of let the whole thing get warm. And just kind of ever so slowly move in. And make sure to evenly heat the entire thing. Like that. Except our stencil came up. So we're probably going to have to do this whole thing again. Wow, that went really badly. Because for some reason our stencil came untaped, which is okay. And of course normally I would redo this whole thing, but since I'm just demonstrating how to do this, and I don't actually need this to work, I may just go ahead and finish this, even though it's going to be a little screwed up. So normally, if you got to this point, you would need to redo this, especially since I have like little solder blobs everywhere, and I have some balls that are sticking out. Yeah. So next thing you do is usually I will put a little bit of flux over the whole thing. And once I've done that, I'll get the hot air and I'll put it back on it, and I'll lift the stencil up so that way the SMC can come off. And then when you're done, it'll just fall off just like that. And if you did it correctly, which I didn't, then it'll look normal. However, as you can see on here, since I screwed this up, there's a couple of these that are bridged together. But actually the rest of these all look pretty good. Like, I don't know if you guys can see that right. See how those two balls right there are bridged together? And this one's a little big. But a lot of these other ones all look pretty darn good. Well, that one's a little big. So if your stencil doesn't come off while you're doing this, usually, like I said, it'll turn out a lot better. But sometimes you just can't control stuff like that. And if I was doing this to put on an actual board, I would for sure have to redo this whole thing. But since I'm just doing this for demonstration, I think that this should, and since this SMC is already damaged, I think that that should be fine. Another thing I do usually when I'm done is I will get my hot air and I'll just blow it all over the stencil to get all the extra flux off of it. So that way whenever I need to do the next reball, I can do it easily, and there won't be a bunch of flux all over it. See how it's cleaned off now? There's a little bit of burned residue still left on it, but for the most part, it's pretty good. And of course you will get a whole bunch of little solder balls too, if you don't clean every single little bit of it off of the Kapton tape. But that is going to be how you reball an SMC. And then to put it on, you just take the old one off. Actually, here, I can go ahead and show with my donor board how to put it back on. So even though this one is screwed up, I'll go ahead and show how to put it back on, just for completeness. So that's where that goes right there. I'll add some flux. And I will once again add some leaded solder to this. Okay. And then oh gosh, that scared me. My phone just fell out of my pocket. Okay, and then we will wick this all up. Okay. Then I'll go ahead, clean that up a little bit with some alcohol. And we will get our SMC soldered back on. Which, like I said, I won't be able to show you that this works since the SMC is missing a pad and also all the balls aren't even. Like I said, this is just a tutorial to show you guys how to do this in case you've never done it, or just so that you can see just how long it takes to be able to reball one. For in my videos, or if you watch anyone else say that they got to reball the SMC, all of the work that has to go into it. Okay, that is all nice and cleaned up now. So now, and when you're soldering this on, you don't want to put a ton of flux down. You just want to put enough to cover all the pads, because if you put too much, well, if you don't put any, then it's not going to solder on there properly, and it'll probably end up blowing away. And if you put too much, then the SMC may float off to the side. or you may have, yeah, you just may have it move around too much when you're trying to solder it on. So then you'll grab your SMC and you'll set it on your board and get it all lined up. Like so. And it's okay if it isn't 100% perfectly lined up, because it'll kind of move into place on its own. But at the same time, you don't want to have it too far off, otherwise you'll end up soldering it in the wrong place. This looks like it's a little too far out. And like I said, if it's a little off, it'll move into place on its own whenever you actually solder it on. You guys see that? There we go. Okay, and now we'll grab the hot air and we'll actually get this thing soldered on. So once again, you'll want to start off from far away. Make sure all the flux gets melted. And then you'll just kind of go around just like you're reflowing it. Oh no, our SMC ran away. Oh shit. A little bit more flux. And of course that'll all end up blowing underneath it. So let's try this again. And normally this would go on easier, but since the reball messed up and the balls aren't all the same size, that makes this a little bit more difficult. See how it's kind of moving? Normally it wouldn't move like that. Since our balls are not all the same size, then we're going to get a little bit of movement. See how now it moved down? That's likely because it moved down into place. There we go. So now our SMC is soldered onto the board, albeit crookedly. I'm going to fix that real quick. Oh, come on. I'm going to go ahead and pull some of these large solder balls off. Off of both the SMC and the board, just to make this a little easier. Like I said, normally you won't have this problem since the reball didn't go too great. Then we're just having to work with what we got here. Okay, so let's try this one more time. Now that we don't have any balls that are way too big. Actually, we still got 2 of them. Okay. So we got all of that taken care of. Set that back on the board. And it should go on smoothly this time. And you'll know it goes into place just like the last few times whenever you see the SMC move. But this time it should just move a tiny bit as it pops into place, or it'll blow right off again. I may not be able to do this underneath the camera because I can't turn my air down at all. I promise it doesn't normally blow away this many times. Normally, it'll go right on without throwing a fit. Okay, there we go. See how that time, how it popped into place? That means that now the SMC is soldered onto the board. Which means now, if I push on it, it's not going to move because it's soldered on there. So, that is the gist of how you solder an SMC. That didn't go exactly as I planned, but sometimes that happens when you're reballing chips like these. Sometimes you'll mess up or the chip just won't work, and you may have to reball it a second or even a third time. I mean, that's pretty common. Most of them, though, I am able to do on my first try. This one just didn't go too well for me. But, so, if you're ever looking to reball an SMC of your own, or really any type of BGA reball, this is basically the procedure you need to do for it. So I hope you guys learned something and that you all have a wonderful day.